Good afternoon, everybody. I am Asaf Ramarowski. I am your host, and I am the Executive Director of the Association for Middle East Studies in Africa. And it is my pleasure to once again welcome you to our webinar series. This afternoon, we have the privilege and opportunity to talk to our friend and colleague, Bashir Goth. Bashir is the official representative of Somaliland to the United States. There's obviously a great deal to discuss on this new found relationship that we currently have between Israel recognizing Somaliland, what's going on with Somaliland, and there's a great deal to dive into the ties in general, practical recognition, the general look at the Red Sea and the Horn of Africa, and looking really at the strategic alliance that is now developing on the heels of the ebb and flow that's happening in the Middle East at large. Bashir has been a prolific writer, researcher, a journalist, and a diplomat. He knows the ins and outs of the arena in Washington and on the ground, and he has a lot to share with us. So he will be talking for about 15, 20 minutes or so. Then we will go into Q&A. Q&A will be via the chat. All you have to do is type in your questions via the chat, and we will do our best to respond to all questions in a timely fashion. If for some reason we don't, feel free to email us after the webinar, and we'll do our best to respond as well after that. But really, without further ado, Bashir, thank you for joining us. It's really a great honor to have you here, and the virtual floor is now yours.
Thank you, Asaf. Thank you very much for hosting me, and thank you to your team and for everybody else who is joining us here today. I really appreciate this opportunity. Let me just start with a little background about Somaliland before we start about the recognition and other issues. So everybody would be just, we can be all on the same page. Somaliland was a British, I will not go into a deep history of Somaliland in the old days and ancient times, but I will just start from the colonial times. So Somaliland was a British colony from 1884 to 1960, when we became independent on 26 June 1960. So that day we gained our independence. Somaliland was recognized by almost 34 countries of the United Nations at that time. And we had our government, in all government institutions, everything. But then there was a dream at that time for the Somali-speaking people in the Horn of Africa. And Somali-speaking people in the Horn of Africa live in different places. We had British Somaliland. We had Italian Somalia, which was Italian colonized, where you see it today as Somalia, and Mogadishu is the capital. We had French Somali coast, which is known today as Djibouti. And we had the Somali region in Ethiopia and the Somali region in Kenya. So the dream of the Somali people at that time, the Somali race in the Horn of Africa, in the 40s and 50s when we were struggling for independence, was to unite all the Somali-speaking people under one government and under one flag. And to bring together in what was called, or the dream was called, Greater Somalia. So when we became independent in 1960, 26 June, 5 days before the Italian part, which became also independent on 1st July, we decided to merge and make what was called a Somali Republic. That marriage did not last long. The Somaliland people were immediately frustrated with it due to cultural differences, due to colonial systems differences, and due to power sharing problems. But then, because it was a civilian government and the dream was still fresh and new, people thought, okay, maybe that will continue for some time. But then in the first year, 1961, the Somaliland military brass, military officers, the military was not yet merged between the two sides. So the Somaliland military officers at that time, the command of the military, they tried to make a coup d'etat and reclaim or reinstate the Somaliland independence that we lost. The coup was aborted, and the officers were court-martialed in a military court in Mogadishu. But the strange thing that happened was that the union between the two parts was never ratified by the parliaments of the two countries. It was never ratified. And the the people and the government will know that the union was never ratified and was not legalized when the officers went into trial. And the Somaliland people hired a British lawyer for them. And the British lawyer, they were actually accused of national treason because of they were trying to divide the country. So the British lawyer, uh, he argued that there was no union to begin with because it was not legalized, and these people, these officers, did not commit any national treason. The government accepted the verdict, and they were released on that rule. So from that day, the people realized and the government realized that the union was never ratified. That compelled the president of the country to actually make an executive order to kind of ratify the unification, but with an executive order. There was a referendum on the constitution of the country 1 year later, in the end of 1961, in which the Somaliland people rejected with 90% majority. But because the other side was more popular, I mean, more population, then it carried the day. In 1969, then there was a military coup, and the country has been taken over by the military dictatorship, a Soviet satellite, which continued for more than 29 years. And this is the time that everything went wrong. And the Somaliland people, felt more isolated and more oppressed than before, isolated economically, politically, and everywhere. Then at the end of that, it became into a civil war, and the Somaliland people have taken arms against the government. The government has dealt with that armed uprising brutally, and they have devastated the cities of the north, including the capital, Hargeisa, in which more than 50,000 people were killed, and more than 500,000 people went into exile as refugees into Ethiopia. Then in 1991, there was also other insurgents on the other side of the country, and the military government collapsed in 1991. From that day, 18 May 1991, the people of Somaliland came together, and they decided that there will be no more union, and they reclaimed or reinstated their independence in 1991, 18 May. So for over now 35 years, because coming May, it will be 35 years. For 35 years, Somaliland people have built a state, a functioning state, a fully functioning state that has all the requirements of a state, bicameral parliament, government institutions, executive branch, elected president, elected parliament, elected local councils, military, all the security apparatus, and everything you can imagine. We actually checked all the boxes of statehood. The only thing we had free market economy. We fostered relations with like-minded democracies in the West, and like Taiwan. We actually we pushed back on dictatorship regimes like the influence of China in the region. We established relations with Taiwan, and we had frequent and constant elections, one person, one vote elections for so many years. We have 6 peaceful transfers of power, and we actually established a model of democracy for the Horn of Africa. The only other country that has that kind of democracy in the Horn of Africa is Kenya, but all the others, you can see them. They're all 30 years, 20 years, 25 years dictatorship. So Somaliland has become really a model without international help, without having access to international financial institutions, without foreign aid. We just built our country by our bootstraps, and democratic rule also. And all these 35 years, we were knocking doors all over the world, knocking doors of the African Union, knocking doors of the Arab world, Muslim world, Western countries, and nobody was listening to the case of Somaliland. It was only last year, December 26, when Israel, the state of Israel, has actually answered our call for recognition and recognized the state of Somaliland. The strange thing is, of the story, Israel was again the first country that recognized Somaliland when we became independent on 26 June 1960. And still, Israel was the only country that reported to the Security Council of the United Nations the atrocities and the genocide that was taking place in Hargeisa in the 80s, 1988, when the military government was bombarding the cities and the people of Somaliland. So for us, it was a normal story or a normal thing that when we get used to, that Israel has to always come to the front when it comes to the call of the Somaliland people. So that's what happened in 26 June. Our people have celebrated that with huge jubilations everywhere in the country. It was not a coincidence, actually. It was not accidental, I mean. It was not accidental to see the Somaliland people, a predominantly Muslim country, that the people have come out to the streets with the flag of Somaliland and the flag of Israel. The first time the flag of Israel was actually publicly celebrated in a Muslim country like that. And, that's what happened. There is a huge geopolitical competition or power struggle going on in the Horn of Africa, particularly in where we are, the strategic position of the Gulf of Aden and the Red Sea. And as you know, we have the port of Berbera. We have 850-kilometer coast along the Gulf of Aden. But the prime real estate we have is the port of Berbera. And the port of Berbera used to be a Soviet naval base in the 70s. And then later on in the 80s, it was a United States naval base. And next to the port is an airport called Berbera Airport, which has one of the longest runways in Africa. And the Americans used it at that airport one time as an emergency landing for the space shuttle in the 80s and late 80s, actually. So with that and what was happening with on the other side of the Gulf of Aden, the Houthis, and the way they were causing a problem to the shipping, trade shipping in the area, it has become the area has become critical to maritime shipping in the world. Almost nearly 20% of world trade passes through that maritime route. Almost maybe 7 to 11% of energy passes through that maritime route. It's a very, very critical route for international economy. And when that is blocked or disturbed or instability happens in that area, the whole world will feel it. So there was powers struggling on that to control and actually dominate that region. And they are, for example, Turkey, which almost owns Somalia now. As you know, Turkey has the largest military base in Mogadishu. The largest military base outside Turkey is in Mogadishu, the capital of Somalia. And China is also another one, which has one of its biggest military bases in Djibouti, and at the same time, huge investments in our neighboring countries, all the neighboring countries. So the only country that was countering that kind of influence was Somaliland, which has established relations with Taiwan and had very good engagement, almost meaningful engagement with Western countries like United States, like UK, but UK and Denmark and some other countries like Taiwan and United Arab Emirates, they have diplomatic offices in Hargeisa. And on top of that, the United Arab Emirates was the only country that for 35 years has actually made huge investment, direct investment to Somaliland, where DP World has taken a 30-year concession on the port of Berbera and invested $400 million to expand and enlarge that port and make it a maritime hub for the Horn of Africa. And they also built a free zone that actually is a replica of the free zone of the Jebel Ali port of Dubai. And that's another advantage for that. So that is in a nutshell that competition is going on there. And when the Israel recognized Somaliland, that competition has become more intense and more stiff. And as you know, all the other country powers in the region, or the mid powers in the region, like China and Turkey, and add to it now Saudi Arabia and Egypt, they are all against the existence of Somaliland. So it's just natural that Israel becomes a counter, and they are all against Israel. And when Israel established recognized Somaliland, it's become quite natural that all these countries have become hostile to the presence of Israel on that strategic area of the Red Sea, which they consider it to be their strategic depth. Or, in another way, if you look at it, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt, they just consider it as an Arab or a Muslim sea. So for Israel to have that, to come to that area, is for them problematic and a security threat. But for us, Somalilanders, it's actually a balance of power, and it's also a support for our security and stability that we actually maintained it for 35 years without any help. And we prevented terrorism and piracy from our borders. So I think with that, I will just leave. I will end my remarks, and I will leave the floor for questions.
Great, thank you for that, Bashir. There is obviously a lot to talk about, and we appreciate you unpacking all of that. So, to your last point, I mean, I'll take the prerogative of asking the first question before we go to the audience, and I'm sure Alex also has a question as well. Part of what I think is phenomenal and really some of the common interests that we talk about when it comes to Israel and Somaliland, and obviously I think are also common denominators for here in the United States, is also the fact that you are pro-Western. You've been fighting Islamism as far as the threat of Islamism growing in the area itself. Obviously, I would argue that the fact that those who are opposing the relationship, I think is quite a sign when it comes to the Qataris, and of course, we're dealing with Qatar in a different kind of constellation as far as being one of the largest patrons of Hamas and funding the war in Gaza. Talk about, if you can, I mean, so the fact that the Israelis are standing with you together, and there is mutual recognition and mutual goals here, not to mention the fact of fighting potentially a forward front base when it comes to dealing with the Houthis, which is also a different front for the Israelis. Are you expecting this to reverberate also in the West? I mean, what's the status of the United States potentially recognizing Somaliland, other European countries as a result of this move, given what's happening in the Middle East? What's your sense of that, if you can talk about that?
You can understand naturally the Arab League and the African Union, they immediately rejected the recognition of Israel for Somaliland for their own different reasons. But all they are on the same page on what they call violating the territorial integrity and the sovereignty of the country they call Somalia, which actually it doesn't exist anymore. It's a failed state. And the government there in Somalia, if you call Somalia, is actually confined or limited to the capital. Not even the capital. Even the president of the country cannot leave his presidential palace and go to and visit other parts of the capital without a heavy security. So, and forget about the rest of the country, of that country. So anyway, that's what they see. I see them as clubs. When you have a club, and there are club members. The club members, they just, they defend each other. And they issue this kind of statements that we know the Arab League, for example, were issuing for over the last 78 years against, on every issue that concerns the Arab world without any teeth. So that's what happened. Yes, but they are kind of diplomatic. They kind of whipped a diplomatic storm against Somaliland, and they brought together emergency meetings for the Arab League and the African Union, and they all went against the recognition of Somaliland. In the rest of the world, you have seen, all of us, we have watched the UN Security Council that case was brought there by Somalia and supported by other Arab and African countries. And, we all know the way it ended, and we were so glad, but one important thing for us as Somalilanders for that issue was it was actually a blessing in disguise in a way, because it was the first time for 35 years that the case of Somaliland was discussed in the UN Security Council. So that itself for Somaliland was an achievement, and which was actually brought by Israel. And we were so actually happy that the United States has taken a stand that was not negative to the recognition of Israel for Somaliland. But in a way, it was a positive stand, although the United States did not recognize Somaliland, but it acknowledged the fact that Israel is an independent, sovereign country that can, recognize any country it wants, and that was very good. The rest of the countries, for example, the Europeans, yes, they issued statements as separate individual countries and also as a European Union, that they respect that kind of a mantra or the cliche which says the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Somalia. While all of them, they know that that's not really true, because Somaliland was never part of Somalia. Somaliland and Somalia were two separate entities, colonized separately, got independence separately. And if we even look at the African Union Charter, which actually says that colonial borders and independence borders of Africa are sacrosanct, then Somaliland actually abides by that, because we are not creating new borders. We are just abiding by the colonial and independence borders. So yeah, that's what's happening now. All these countries are up in arms against Somaliland and Israel. Israel's presence in the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden, although they are not yet present, they have not yet come. Right. But that's what's happening. We don't expect the European Union, for example, view to change in the very short term. But I think if the United States has taken a position and recognized Somaliland, that would be a game changer. That would be a huge game changer. And we hope that will happen sometime in the near future.
Great, thank you. Alex, over to you.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for a very interesting, very important presentation. Those of us who are not immediately familiar with the colonial history, in particular, of Africa as a whole, unfortunately, there's a big gap in Western understanding, and East Africa, the Horn of Africa in particular. But I want to focus in on one thing that you mentioned in particular, and that's the contrast, the cultural contrast between Somaliland and Somalia. One colonized by the British, the other not by the Italians, and there's also French Somalia. How would you describe these contrasts? The background of Somali speakers and culture is similar, but what are the local differences that resulted in this union, the split, and the contrasts since then?
The contrast is, for example, the contrast that you can find in Arab countries. For example, there are 22 Arab countries that speak Arabic language, okay, but they are not the same. They don't share the same kind of culture. For example, you have Maghreb states in the north of Africa, We are Arabic speaking, but their Arabic is completely different than the Arabic of the Levant states like Syria, Lebanon, and Jordan, okay? And the Gulf states like Saudi Arabia and the other UAE and the other Gulf states. So the Somali people lived as tribes before colonialism. There was no interaction between them. For example, people who live in Somalia, distant south, and the people of Somalia who live in the north, which is the Red Sea area, they didn't have any contact with each other. Mm-hmm. So there was the nuances of cultural differences was there. Even the language has dialects, which are some kind of different. If you look at the folklore of the Somaliland people and Somalia, it's completely two different cultures, okay? So that's one thing. Then the mindset of the people and how they see things. In the south, they were more agricultural. They were more colonial Italian culture, which was, the Italian colonialism was a system of assimilation with the local people. And the British was a system of isolation, and they were isolated from the local people. So Somaliland people, they maintained and preserved their traditional way of ruling, their traditional culture. That was intact until now, and that's actually what saved Somaliland from going into a devastating civil war, like what's happening in Somalia. While in the Somalia, they lost that long time ago. So there are differences like that. And as you said, the political, the worldview of the people and the mindset is completely different. And then the colonial system between the Italy and the British were completely different.
So much of the contrast, although not all, as you say, agricultural, non-agricultural communities, isolated communities, but the colonial legacy is significant and has damaged Somalia in all of its separate parts. Is that fair to say?
Yes, absolutely. That's true. The colonial legacy is completely has a huge role in the difference between the two sides, and even on the other side. For example, if you go to Djibouti, they have French culture, which is completely different from us and from the Italian side also. So, but Djibouti was lucky to have its own separate state, and they did not join the Somali Union.
Well, when one looks at the European colonial legacies elsewhere in Africa, just in North Africa, Libya colonized by Italy, not a positive outcome in the longer term, as opposed to other parts, Algeria, which managed for a time until its independence, which shattered the country for decades, really. Kenya, which is very different from, I don't know, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, let's say. So we're still dealing 50 years, 100 years, in some cases later, 80 years, with these colonial legacies. How are they to be overcome?
Well, that's why Africa decided that they have to respect the colonial borders, because there are African tribes. For example, the Somali people, when they decided that, or the dream they had, that they have to unite all the Somali-speaking people in the Horn of Africa under one government, under one flag, that might not have been a bad dream, but it was unrealistic. They did not realize that there are many other African tribes, or you can say ethnic groups, which live across different countries and different borders. Like, for example, the Fulani, or the Hausa, or the Swahili, or the Berbers in Maghreb states. How many countries they live? I mean, there are millions of people. They live across different countries. So that's why in the Berlin, actually the problem started in the Berlin Conference in 1884, but the European colonizers came together and they just sliced Africa like a piece of cake without any consideration to anything, whether the different tribes and language and of people. But then that history, and we cannot reinvent the wheel. We have to live with history. that we inherited from the colonial history that we inherited. And yes, the problem is still there, but that's the reality we live in, and we have to live with that and go forward, just like the Asians also did, went forward and prospered.
So one cheer for being colonized by the British as opposed to the Italians. If one had to be colonized, better the British than somebody else, perhaps. Better not to be colonized at all. But here we are, 100 more than 150 years later, really, almost. Should we go on to I could continue, but should we go on to questions from the audience, I think?
Yeah. Suzanne, why don't you take the question from the audience, please?
We have a question here that says, how does Somaliland respond to those who say it is violating Islam by befriending Israel? It is not alone, but must have some stated principle on Israel's right to be where it is.
Well, that is easy because Islam is a religion, it's a faith, and a faith is between the person and his creator, and everybody has his own faith. Islam says, I have my own religion and you have your own religion. Lakum dinukum waliya din. That's what it says. You have your own religion and I have mine. And we are talking about worldly things, that worldly relations, worldly politics, interests, economic interests, security interests. We are talking about politics and world interests. We're not talking about faith. We're not talking about the world after death. We're not talking about that. So I think that's not an issue for us. Yes, there are always people who will use religion and the name of religion to have to achieve their own ends, their own interests, their own power. We have seen that, and that's why radicalism is everywhere in the world. But Somaliland people, if you look at the jubilation and the celebration of the Somaliland people in the Somaliland streets, then you will realize that more than 95%, even more of the people are happy with what's happening. Until now, today, after 1 month, the youth of Somaliland are still celebrating with the Israeli flag everywhere and making fun of it. Really, it's really good. So that shows you the sentiment of the Somaliland people.
So on that point, I mean, let me jump in for a second. So, I know that everything hasn't fully materialized yet. Are we seeing, as far as peer-to-peer cultural relations, students, connections, the cultural stuff that you're talking about, is that already in the making that you're putting it into place as far as student exchange programs, cultural delegations? I mean, what is, given the sentiment that you're seeing now, the jubilation, what kind of programs that can you talk about that are being put in place that can expand that?
You're right, Asaf. They have yet to sign diplomatic relations and exchange of ambassadors, and that will happen soon. It will not be that far when the president of Somaliland will travel to Israel, and the two sides will actually sign formal diplomatic relations and exchange of ambassadors. But in the meantime, even now, we can see already cultural and delegations going from both sides. We can see, for example, Israeli media, they have come in a big number to Hargeisa and Somaliland and Berbera to cover the country and the jubilation of the people. You can find Somaliland people, Somaliland business people, Somaliland youth immediately went to Israel and interacting with their Israeli counterparts. You can see institutions reaching out to each other, like universities and think tanks. So yes, and I know several Israeli delegations that will go very soon to Somaliland, like think tanks and business people, and will be engaging with their counterparts in Somaliland. So it's already going on. All these kind of engagements are already going on, even before we sign formal relations.
Great. So take it one step further. I mean, I think obviously the region now is shifting with the ebb and flow now with this board of peace, the future, the impact of Gaza. One of the main challenges for the Israelis, and of course, which is also a common threat as it relates to the border, as far as Yemen and the Houthis. How is that, impacting? I mean, are you seeing, strategic alliances playing out here vis-a-vis the Houthis as far as those kind of threats? I mean, is there collaboration there that can build upon ensuring the stability in that area? I mean, what can you talk about? What can you say about that?
Uh, at the beginning, I want to say Somaliland is a peaceful country. It's a peace-loving country, and we want to live in peace like we did over the last 35 years with all the neighboring countries in the region. But that doesn't mean that we will not defend ourselves, okay? Or will not be ready for the defense of our country if there is a foreign attack or foreign interference with our interests. That's how we were defending our country against terrorism and piracy over the years. So the Houthis have already made statements that they will attack Somaliland if if the Israeli state, for example, the state of Israel, if they establish security unities in Somaliland. They already said that, and they already made statements about that. There are also other states, like I mentioned it earlier, some of them, like Saudi Arabia, for example, like Egypt, Qatar, Turkey, who are coming together as a bloc against, for example, Israel and probably the United States, which they assume will be going to recognize Somaliland in the near future. So you can see that power blocks already emerging and forming in the Horn of Africa. Some people, some blocks that were already there, and they thought that nobody will come and they will dominate the area, like Turkey and China, are now feel threatened by the new alliance, which could be the Israel, the United States, could be, for example, the United Arab Emirates on the other side, Somaliland, and that would be probably the other bloc. Yes. So I hope wisdom will and good reason will work, will prevail in the region. But we in Somaliland, and I think Somaliland and Israel now share common enemies and common friends in that kind of power struggle.
Oh, great. Alex?
Sure. So let me ask you in that respect about the Somaliland perspective on the current inter-Arab and inter-Muslim competition. Saudi Arabia has essentially tacitly allied itself with Turkey. Iran is diminished, but not yet out. The whole situation in Yemen is still very fluid, but the UAE is being pressured out of the region. Does Somaliland have a perspective on this, a desired outcome from all of these very strange to the American eye and very rapid changes?
It is really a rapid change, and it's new to the region also, because, for example, Somaliland, we had actually historical relations with the Gulf countries, particularly with Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. So Saudi Arabia, for example, we have our people have emotional links, emotional bonds with Saudi Arabia because of religion. You know that. And not only that, but also economic relations, because the mainstay of Somaliland economy, the backbone of Somaliland economy is livestock. So we actually export millions of livestock on the hoof to Saudi Arabia every year, particularly during the Hajj season. Millions and millions of livestock we export to Saudi Arabia. So Saudi Arabia is our main market in that way, and it has been like that for centuries. We would like to maintain that brotherly relations between the people of Somaliland and the people of Saudi Arabia, and we are in the same region and same area. Likewise, the other Arab countries also. But politics is a very stringent game that people sometimes the interests of countries or geostrategic interests or hegemonic interests of some countries will actually uh, uh, you call cause an imbalance in that kind of the balance that existed before. So yes, I can see that there are some kind of fractures in that kind of brotherly relations and brotherhood that existed, that prevailed between Somaliland and for example like Saudi Arabia. But I don't think that will last, because at the end of the day, I think we are in the same region, we have the same interest, and I think everybody will accept the reality, and the reality is Somaliland is here to exist, and they have to accept it. Just like Israel is a reality to exist, and many Arab countries that did not accept Israel for many, many, many years have now accepted and have relations with Israel.
Does Somaliland have a perspective on why Saudi policy has shifted so dramatically in the last weeks, really, months, certainly?
I am not really sure, but according to the analysis I was reading on both sides of the aisle in the Arab world and the English and the Western press also, I think it has something to do with hegemonic, competition between Saudi Arabia on one side, Iran on the other side, Turkey on one side, and now the addition of Israel. That's actually what caused the whole thing, because Saudi Arabia was like a sleeping giant. Okay, with the exception of their intervention in Yemen, they were not, they didn't show much interest in intervening in other parts of the world. But I think with Iran now weakening and probably the mullahs there on their last leg, okay, probably Saudi Arabia sees itself as the regional power, and they have to now show that they can control their interests in the Gulf of Aden, in the Red Sea, and in the whole region of the Middle East. So probably, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm right, but that's how I see it. It's a new power competition, and Saudi Arabia wants to show the world that they are a power to reckon with here in the region of the Middle East.
And the same question, I think, pertains to the matter of competition between local African powers, Egypt and Ethiopia, the situation in Sudan. Does Somaliland have a perspective on where those conflicts are going, or obviously a peaceful outcome is desirable in all cases, but it doesn't seem to be promising in certainly in Sudan, and competition between powers on the Nile River as well.
Yeah, I mean, as we all know, the bone of contention between Ethiopia and Egypt is the Nile River and the dam, the Ethiopian dam. That's the bone of contention, and that is something historical, and that has actually gained momentum since Ethiopia started to build the dam, and the dam has now been completed, and Ethiopia is not going to demolish that. That's a reality now on the ground. Somaliland has great relations with Ethiopia. Actually, we have cultural, economic, security relations with Ethiopia. Ethiopia is the only country that we have the best of relations in the whole countries of the region. Yes, Ethiopia doesn't recognize Somaliland, but they have a diplomatic office in Hargeisa, and we have great friendly relations and economic relations with Ethiopia. So Egypt, historically, we had good relations with Egypt. We have historical bonds with Egypt. Before the British came to Somaliland, the British colonial power came to Somaliland, Somaliland was ruled by the Ottoman Empire by proxy through Egypt. Okay, so Egypt had, historical roots in Somaliland before even they knew about what Somalia was on the other side. So, but now you can see that Egypt, because of their rift with Ethiopia on the Nile water, they see that they want to deny Ethiopia any access to the sea, whether it's the Red Sea or anywhere else. So when Somaliland signed a memorandum of understanding, or MOU, in January 2024, Egypt has actually become so crazy about that, because they said we will not allow any country that's not coastal to the Red Sea to have a foothold in the Red Sea. And what they mean was that they want to deny Ethiopia of having access to the Red Sea. And with that, it started the hostility of Egypt to Somaliland. Before that, we didn't have any hostility with Egypt, but that's how it started. And that's how it still continues. And Egypt actually wants now, their Egyptian dream is that Somaliland to be demolished, or Somaliland to go back to the union with Somalia. And definitely, as long as they are, as long as that's their thinking, then we will have problems with Egypt, and we will definitely side with our friends in Ethiopia. There's no question about that.
Okay. Suzanne, why don't you take the question from the audience, please?
Can you please say a word about ancient pre-colonial links between nowadays Somaliland and the Jews / Israel, if such links existed?
Yes, Egypt, as I just mentioned, had historical links with Somaliland. Actually, Egyptian, if you talk about Egypt, the old Egypt, the ancient Egypt. I mean, Somaliland relations with Egypt started with the ancient Egypt from the time of the pharaohs. The Egyptians have even sent an expeditions to Somaliland, and they have taken incenses and frankincenses from Somaliland. So that was up to that old times. There were links, but even later, during the Ottoman Empire, the Egyptians were ruling the coastal cities of Somaliland, like Zayla and Berbera, on behalf of the Ottoman Empire. And when the British came, they have taken over the Egyptians from the Somaliland from the Egyptians, just like they did with Sudan, because they were also ruling Sudan. So Somali people used to go to, or Somali students used to go to Egypt for education. For example, like my father, he went to Al Azhar University. Okay, so there are many multitudes of Somaliland people who used to go to Egypt for education, mostly for Islamic education, and we had that historical bond between Egypt and Somaliland. On the other side, Israel. We didn't, other than Israel being the first country that recognized Somaliland, the day we gained our independence in 1960, we didn't have much relations with the state of Israel at that time. But there are Jewish roots in Somaliland, because the Jewish people used to live in the coastal cities of Somalia. We used to have very old city-states in the 15th, 16th centuries, up to the 18th century, up to the 19th century. So in the city of Zayda and Berbera, for example, Jewish communities used to live there, and still there are signs of their houses, or of their synagogues are still, the ruins are still available, and archaeology has even taken found some of the other traces of the Jewish culture in the Somaliland country and territory. So yes, there was kind of cultural relations, there were trade relations, there were Jewish business people in Hargeisa, in Berbera, in Zayla, and all these places in the old days, and they almost all of them probably they left just by the time of independence.
Sure. Going back, stepping forward, I mean, actually on that last note, Bashir, how familiar, is Somaliland with the history of Israel and Ethiopian Jews, and Somaliland Jews. I mean, can you, talk about a little bit, is that a story that's familiar within the zeitgeist, of Somaliland, understanding that, those cultural relations, and are there similar kind of relations from a from part of the theological understandings, looking at, that some of the tribes in Ethiopia related to the lost tribes of Dan. Are there similar kind of connections or stories related to those communities you just mentioned, and Somaliland and the Jewish community?
We know in Ethiopia there were Jewish community, and many of them went migrated to Ethiopia in the recent years. So we know that. But in Somaliland, as far as I know, and I read the history, and and the mythical stories, or the oral traditions of our country. I mean, there have been Jewish people who live in Somaliland, coastal cities, and was part of the community. Uh, but that doesn't mean that they were, for example, like the Ethiopian Jewish people, who were actually probably maybe a tribe of Israel, who migrated all the way. But I think here in Somaliland, there were individual people or individual families who just migrated to the area and came and then flourished in business and otherwise. So, but other than that, I think the Somaliland, the history of the Jewish people and the history of Israel in Somaliland, mostly the Somaliland people believe, came through the history of the Arab world. So I can say the Somaliland people saw the history of Israel and the history of Jewish people through the eyes of the Arab world and through the eyes of Islam, which was in many ways, which was not friendly actually. We all know that. But the strange thing is that despite that, when the recognition, there was no historical hostility of the Somaliland people towards the Jewish people. That didn't exist. And the testimony is when Israel recognized Somaliland recently, I mean, you cannot find a predominantly Muslim countries where all the people, young and old, and women and men and children, come out like that and celebrate. Okay, celebration is good because they celebrate for their recognition that they have been waiting for 35 years, but with the Israeli flag and with pride, that was actually something that I think surprised the Arab world and surprised everybody else.
And that's a positive model that obviously we hope that will catch fire as far as, other recognitions that would happen along the way. But I mean, that's a very well taken point as far as a large Muslim country recognizing, especially with the ebb and flow that's happening in the region.
Absolutely, and let's hope so. Let's hope so. That's true.
Great. I'm just keeping an eye on the clock here, Alex. I'm going to give you the last question to Bashir this afternoon, and then hopefully you could also come back and we could talk more as things develop. As obviously there is things are developing rapidly, but there's obviously more to discuss. But I'm going to give Alex the last questions, and then we'll close it up for this afternoon.
Okay. Well, I think the last question should be, what would Somaliland like U.S. policy to be in the region, in the Horn of Africa generally? U.S. military intervention in Yemen after European failures, U.S. not yet recognizing Somaliland, hopefully soon. Great power competition, middle power competition. What would Somaliland like the U.S. course to be?
I think Somaliland has chosen its political path a long time ago, and that is the path of democracy and free market economy and the Western world. So we hope that the United States will recognize Somaliland in the near future, and then we'll be in the camp of the free world and free countries. Okay, and that's where our interest lies at Somaliland. And but we also expect and our desire is that peace prevails in the whole region and peace prevails in the whole over the whole country and the world also. So, when we think about practical and politics, or pragmatically, when we think about, I think Somaliland will be in the camp of free loving countries, democratic countries like the United States, Israel, and other free market economies that actually promote peace and recognize the reality on the ground of Somaliland, like the United Arab Emirates and any other country like Ethiopia, probably Kenya. Who knows, maybe will be on board soon, because until now, they are the only two countries in the African Union that did not condemn, like the other countries, the Israeli's recognition of Somaliland.
Great. Bashir, Alex, you wanted to say something?
No, I think
Okay.
we can all endorse these hopes and these recommendations, and hope that this will come soon. So
100%. So really, on that note, positive note, Bashir, I really want to thank you for taking the time to talk to us. There's obviously a lot of positivity going on, and a lot of goodwill and hope that we hope will catch up and will catch on. As the region moves along, we hope you can come back and talk to us about any future developments. So I want to thank you for taking the time to talk to us. I want to thank Alex for joining me as always, my colleagues Suzanne and Emily, and above all, the audience for listening this afternoon. Be on the future for future webinars, and we will continue these conversations as across the region as all these positive recommendations and changes are happening on a daily basis. So really thank you. I hope everybody has a good day. Bashir, thank you again for joining us, and we will talk soon.
Thank you for hosting me, and it was a pleasure to be with you. And I'll be happy to join you in the future when if things develop in the future. Thank you very much, all of you.
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.